The Air 2S is able to shoot 4K footage at a frame rate of up to 60 frames per second, and this is one of the main upgrades of this drone compared to previous models of the Mavic line. So far, the Phantom 4 Pro was the only DJI prosumer drone able to shoot at such a frame rate and resolution. In this video I will show how slow motion can make your drone footage much more exciting in many situations, and how to make the most of the higher frame rate of the Air 2S to achieve high quality slow motion. When shooting landscape footage from far away, which is often the case with drones, slow motion is not really needed, especially if there are no moving elements in the shot. But anytime we have moving elements, we can add much more interest to the scene by slowing down the action. When we get closer to the action, slow motion becomes even more important to convey a different mood to the scene. Let me show you a few examples of slow motion applied to footage. Before someone calls the drone police, please note that obviously some of the footage shown here was shot on a ground-based camera and not with a drone. A question I often hear is, but I often see footage accelerated or slowed down. Can I not simply slow down in post-processing and forget about this confusing thing of frame rate? Well, it is always possible to accelerate footage while post-processing without loss of quality. But the same is not true when slowing it down. As we can see from this example of slow motion made from a higher frame rate interpreted in the frame rate of the timeline, versus footage shot at the same frame rate as the timeline and simply slowed down in post-processing. The most used frame rates are 24, 25 or 30 frames per second. I use 24, which is actually 23,997, but I will refer to it here as 24. A very simple example, we have 4 seconds of footage shot at 24 frames per second, so a total of 24 by 4 frames, which is 96. If we want to double the speed, we need 2 seconds of footage, still at 24 frames per second, so 48 frames. We have plenty of frames, all the software has to do is dump half of the frame and keep the 44 needed, so it can maintain basically the same quality. If we want to speed it up by 4 times, we only need 1 second of footage, and again there are plenty of frames, just drop 3 out of 4, no other trick needed. But if we want to slow down our 4-second clip, the software has to fill 8 seconds and needs 192 frames, but only has 96. So it has to somehow create new frames, and this is where the quality declines, whatever method we use. The best way to slow down a clip is to start with a higher amount of frames. In our example, if we start with a 4-second clip shot at 48 frames per second, which is the double of 24, we have a total of 192 frames. If we now slow down the speed by half, we end up again with an 8-second clip, since our project is 24 frames per second. We need 24 by 8 seconds, which is indeed 192. We have exactly the frames we need. The best results are used when using a frame rate which is exactly a multiple of the one used in the project, so that all the frames are used. But other frame rates can sometimes be used. For example, it is possible to shoot in 30 frames per second and encode in 24 in order to get a very subtle 20% slowdown effect, which can be quite cinematic at times. But the software has to drop 1 frame out of each 5. This can cause small artifacts, but the result is good enough for most non-professional users. We can also use 60 frames per second for a 60% slowdown effect. In this case, some frames will again be dropped. With the Air 2S in slow motion mode, we also have 120 frames per second at 1080p, which is 5 times slower, with no frame dropped. At 4K resolution, the Air 2S can shoot footage at the following frame rates: 24, 25, 30, 48, 50 and 60. The same frame rates are also available at 2.7K and at 1080p. If we choose the option slow motion on the video menu, we can get 120 frames per second at 1080p for super slow-mo. Notice how, with frame rates above 30 frames per second, we get a very noticeable crop in the resulting footage. Some users have complained about it, but I see it as a positive. When using higher frame rate, I generally want to be close to the action, so this crop factor is in most cases very useful to get even closer. Sadly, there are a couple of limitations in the use of frame rates above 30 frames per second. When shooting for slow motion, in many cases we want to track a subject, but the intelligent flight modes are only available up to 30 frames per second, including Action Track and Spotlight, the two most useful ones for tracking. The Air 2S has excellent zoom capabilities, but at 4K resolution and frame rates higher than 30 frames per second, the function is not available. I hope that both limitations will be solved by upcoming firmware upgrades. The process to get slow motion from a higher frame rate is quite simple, and it is the same for all video editor. Here I will be showing how it works in Premiere Pro, probably the most widely used. I will show two different methods to make sure that the editor you will be using will contain at least one of them. After we drop the first clip into the timeline, we set the frame rate of our project by going to Sequence. sequence settings, and at the top we choose the time base as 23.976 frames per second. If we drop a clip shot at 48 fps, double the frame rate of our project, you can see that it's still playing at normal speed. We need to slow it down to half speed, and there are two ways to achieve this. The simplest way is to go to the icon of the clip in the lower left window, right-click on it and choose Modified, and then Interpret Footage. Then in frame rate we select Assume this frame rate and enter 23.976. You can see that the clip is now playing at half speed, as 48 frames are played at 24 fps speed, which is exactly half. Notice that the original frame rate of the file is kept in memory and can always be retrieved if needed. This can be useful when working on a project with plenty of files with different frame rates. It is also possible to batch modify several clips by selecting them, right-clicking and choosing Assume this frame rate. Another method that can be used is to simply right-click on the clip in the timeline and choose Speed Duration. We're presented with this window where we can enter the desired speed. In this case we have a 48 fps clip and we want to slow it down to half speed, so we enter 50%. Notice that the duration of the clip displayed just below will double. When using this second method, we must enter the correct percentage of speed reduction, according to the frame rate at which the file was shot. Assuming, as usual, a timeline of 24 frames per second, if the footage was shot at 30 frames per second, we must enter 80%. For a file shot at 48, 50%. For one shot at 60 frames per second, 40%. Note that when we shoot in slow motion mode, therefore at 120 frames per second at 1080p, the file is automatically interpreted and we don't need to reduce the speed. Click on this link to watch my video about my favorite cinematic moves with drones. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel. See you soon.